Thank you, Miss Rees, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I would also like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Dartford, in securing this important debate this afternoon. Because as we've heard, the Labour Mayor of London's plans to charge people to enter the Greater London area by car would be a disaster, felt both by those who live just outside the boundary, but also indeed those who live in communities like mine just within it. The Greater London boundary is not some kind of great and obvious spectacle. London isn't Las Vegas. There aren't roads covering great expanses of nothingness, motorists going through deserts or deserted countryside to suddenly drive up to some great metropolis, and suddenly there you are, you've arrived in London. I'm afraid, frankly, crossing the border is quite underwhelming, and very few people would know or care that they've crossed an arbitrary line that was drawn in 1965. Carshalton and Wallington sits on the border with Surrey, the two roads leading directly out of my constituency into places like Woodmansterne, Banstead and beyond into Reigate, Redhill and Epsom are not great thoroughfares. There's nothing about them that signals that some kind of great line has been crossed. Indeed, Carshalton Road to the south is fairly narrow, with a few houses dotted along the way down to Woodmansterne, a home on one side of the border, a country lane on the other. It's fairly unassuming. Apologies, Mr. Rees. Under the Mayor of London's plans, this quiet little spot would suddenly become some kind of outer London checkpoint or toll road, with residents living just on the wrong side of this line being charged up to £5.50 a day for driving across it. And whilst on the subject of the charge, whether we're talking about £3.50 or £5.50 is frankly a moot point. TfL's estimate is that up to 82% of the expected revenue would be lost in the overhead and in the implementation. So there's likely to be pressure to increase this charge from day one, frankly, to make the scheme worthwhile. Now, whilst residents living inside the boundary, like my constituents, might not be the one facing the charge, the impact of this could be equally damaging, not least of which on family life, as actually been brought up by many honourable friends so far in this debate. Like many families, my own dad and several of my relatives live just outside the Greater London boundary. Suddenly, they'll be charged for crossing the boundary to come and visit. Also, you need to think about those families who rely on another family member for childcare. They could be looking up to £1,000 a year in terms of being charged. And this is not to mention also the hit that this could have on the economy and our public services. As we've heard from my honourable friend, the member for Orpington, 51% of Metropolitan Police officers, for example, live outside London. And who on earth would pay to cross a border to go shopping in constituencies like mine when they could look elsewhere in Surrey without being charged at all? One of the areas that I think this could end up having the greatest impact on is health. It is fantastic news that the government has given the go-ahead for a £500 million investment to improve Epsom and St Helier hospitals and build a third new hospital in Sutton, benefiting patients not just from Sutton and Merton, but also from Surrey. However, patients, NHS staff and visitors coming to this new Sutton hospital from Surrey will now be facing a daily charge to cross the boundary. And it is no good saying that people will find alternative methods of transport, because public transport between outer London and the home counties is notoriously poor, because TfL and the county councils, frankly, do not have a good set of working relationships with one another. So taking, for example, bus services from Sutton into Surrey, they are not nearly frequent enough, and there is absolutely no discussion of funds being used to address this. There's also another weakness shown up in this plan. As my honourable friend, the member for Orpington, again laid out, this is purely a money-making scheme. It's not a green initiative. The idea itself came from a financial sustainability plan, not an environmental policy announcement. Even if people could afford, for example, to go onto a purely electric vehicle, they would not escape charge. And the Mayor of London, again, has been said by many colleagues, has said that he would drop the idea if he could get the £500 million of vehicle exercise duty retained instead, demonstrating once again that this is about money, not about the environment. And this policy has generated a lot of concern from my constituents. The Outer London boundary charge would hit families, the economy, and our public services, punishing not just Londoners this time, but also those who live just outside the capital as well. So I'm really, really pleased that our Conservative London Assembly candidate, Neil Garrett, has been supporting Sean Bailey in opposing this move. And I would urge that the Minister does all they can to ensure that the Mayor does scrap this plan and not punish Londoners for the cost of calm.